you talked about this comprehensive strategy, and I'm particularly interested in the last concept that you spoke about, the management techniques. So, when it comes to very large projects, there are a number of teams that are working, on projects. How does lean management help, in kind of making it a collaborative project, and so that everybody is on the same page when it comes to timelines? Welcome to the second session of CQRA Quality Dialogues, where we are looking at construction delays. In fact, like we discussed, Mr. Kunte, they seem to be a major bane in the construction industry, and majority of projects suffer from it. So this time in our second series, we're going to look at how to prevent them. What are the various ways that we can look at stopping construction delays as far as possible. So I welcome all our viewers again to this, particular episode of CQRA Quality Dialogues. I am your host, Architect Shruti Hussain, and I'm joined by the quality expert, Mr. Ujwal Kunte, who is the founder and MD of CQRA, which is one of the country's leading auditors for construction quality, safety, and quantity surveying. So who better to discuss quality in construction than Mr. Kunte? So looking forward, Mr. Kunte.
It's a pleasure.
I'll straight away get to the question that I'm sure a lot of viewers are interested in, that basically what should a good comprehensive strategy to mitigate risks from construction delays look like?
Very interesting question. We are in modern times, so I would say that continuing from our last part, it should start with a very good design management strategy. So today you have tools like BIM, where various consultants can come on board, and they work on the same platform. So you must have all your design done to the last detail and put it on BIM, so that all the stakeholders, including the contractors, they have a complete picture of the entire project.
Right. Yes.
Then secondly, choosing reliable vendors, suppliers, choosing a right contractor. Okay. Then I mentioned about a good contract strategy.
Yes.
That should have proper milestones. Normally what happens is that there are certain bonus and penalty clauses related to completing the project on time. Okay. But our experience shows that by the time project ends, there are a lot of things that have happened, and it's very difficult to pinpoint any particular deficiency to the contractor. Okay. And make him responsible for the delay.
All right.
So it is ideal that you apply these bonus and penalty at various milestones during the project. So the contractor has got scope to improve upon. Plus, I would in the end say that there are very good techniques like lean management and CCPM, which is critical chain project management. They can be effectively used to control project delays.
You talked about this comprehensive strategy, and I'm particularly interested in the last concept that you spoke about, the management techniques. So, when it comes to very large projects, there are a number of teams that are working, on projects, and they can develop a tunnel vision where each team is just bothered about their output, and there is less of collaborative effort. So, how does lean management help in kind of making it a collaborative project, and so that everybody is on the same page when it comes to timelines?
Yeah. So this lean management is more about scheduling.
Okay.
So what it does is that it says that you have to make processes more predictable.
Okay.
Because what happens is that when there are different agencies who are working on a project, and one agency follows another agency. Let's say that you have a structure RCC agency which is followed by somebody who is doing block work or brickwork or plaster.
Right.
So the next agency who comes on board, they are, each agency is factoring a delay from the earlier agency. Okay. So what happens is that when you plan a project, it is continuously, like a straight line, which you look at the CPM per chart, which you see. But in reality, it has a lot of gaps. Okay, because an agency, when it comes on board, it will always factor that the earlier agency is likely to get delayed, and it wouldn't like to put its people, on board where they cannot get a work front.
True. Yes.
So each of these agencies adding up, a buffer, it adds to the overall buffer of the project.
Right. Okay.
So the idea of lean management is to have a perfect synchronization between different activities and different agencies who are coming on board. So they have minimum buffer between them.
Right.
So each agency knows exactly when it can deploy its full resources.
Okay.
So it's a very interesting technique, and it can really crash project durations by almost 15 to 20%.
You just spoke about lean management and that concept of the buffer, which is really interesting. And if it is implemented, like you said, it can totally get down the delays as such. We also have issues when it comes to resource management. If they're not utilized well, then that also can lead to all sorts of delays. So what is that we can use also in terms of project management? So there is critical chain project management probably, which can maybe help mitigate that. So can you elaborate a little bit more about that?
So actually this CCPM, critical chain project management, was a new technique, promoted by Elijah Goldratt.
Okay.
He was a kind of a management scientist, who promoted this concept, and it's a very interesting idea. What happens is that generally when we plan any activity, we put buffer in each activity. That means, let us say, a slab cycle, you plan for 15 days or 21 days.
Okay.
If you break it down into sub parts and exactly find the time duration for each of the individual things, probably you could do it in 10 days. Okay, but you add a factor to it and make it 15. So we have this tendency of adding a buffer or a factor in each activity.
Yes.
Okay, and now once you have that added up, then that becomes the legitimate time duration for that activity.
Okay.
And simple concept that work expands to fill the available time. Okay, so actually there was time frame required was 10 days. You added a buffer of another 4 or 5 days. Okay, made it 15, but 15 becomes the legitimate time for that activity. And then if the project gets delayed beyond 15, then you say that we are delayed by 2 days.
Understood.
Okay, so you are adding a buffer in each and every activity. So what CCPM says is that don't add buffer in each individual activities. Add buffer, a total buffer in stages. That means don't make a slab cycle of 21 days or 18 days or 15. If you could do it in 12 days, make it 12 days. Okay, and 12 into, let us say there are 10 cycles, so 120 days. So your typical time frame for completing 10 slabs is 120 days. Okay, and add a buffer in the end. So that you can consume that buffer to cater to any uncertainties that are happening in the project. Otherwise, what would happen is that if you, instead of 12 days, if you take 15 days, then that 15 will become the normal.
Right.
So he says that you should not make that. You should consume the buffer from the overall buffer, that is kept.
Yes.
So you have a better track, and it has been known that if you do this, you can really save time by 15 to 20%.
That was actually really made a lot of sense in terms of where the buffer should be. Of course you need buffers, but how to kind of calibrate them probably is one of the key to a successful project that gets done on time. The other aspect that we are dealing with, delays, is also the involvement of the government in terms of how to put some regulatory sort of curbs on developers. So we have RERA and the RERA Act, which is coming, and apparently this act has had some kind of positive fallouts. So according to a report, project delays in major Indian metros have dropped nearly 40%. Since RERA's enforcement, and also builders have paid more than 600 crore rupees in penalties for non-compliance or delays. So, maybe there are real consequences to actually having, regulatory curbs. But can you help us read between the lines? There might be something also more to it, since It's not just, a black and white, positive fallout. There might be something else. So just help us kind of figure this out.
First and foremost, I would say that RERA is a great thing that
Mhm.
that has happened to our industry,
Right.
because it is giving assurance to the end buyers on
Mhm.
not only the quality but when they will get possession.
Right.
So there is a kind of a commitment from the developer, and there's a committed date,
Mhm.
given by these developers. So definitely it has made a positive impact.
Yeah.
But what has happened is, because of these penalties, most of the developers, they are adding, margins. That means, what is happening is, a project that should have taken 3 years, they would add another 6 months or a year,
Okay.
so that they don't fall into the penalty zone. So they are, keeping this extra margin.
I see.
Okay. So what you see that, project delays have reduced,
Mm.
that is primarily because developers have started adding up a margin on their project.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
And of course, once they have, final date is committed, they are taking all efforts to complete it in time.
Right. Okay.
But what it is doing is that it is adding to the cost, because a project that probably should have got completed in 3 years, if it goes for 3.5 years,
Right.
because the developer has committed 4 years, that's additional cost, because so I would say that although it has been beneficial, it has brought more predictability to the end buyer, but it has not actually reduced the timelines.
That's actually a very interesting observation, and you perfectly read between the lines, as I asked you to. So cost, yeah, cost implications which probably get passed on to the buyer, and I want to discuss cost, a little more in detail. So, what exactly is this cost implication universe when it comes to delays in construction projects?
So when a project gets delayed, there are multiple types of costs that come into picture.
Okay.
One is that there's an interest cost. The developer is taking some money on interest, and if a project is supposed to get completed in 36 months, if it goes for 42 months,
Okay.
there's an additional cost.
Of course.
Then there is a cost of site management. He has to keep the entire site infrastructure, transport, everything, his entire team, consultants, the people who are on the site managing the project. So that cost adds up.
Okay.
Then there is certain portion of head office cost that adds up, because head office is supporting the site.
Right.
And apart from this, there is an opportunity cost, so that is loss of rental, or sometimes he has to pay a penalty to the end buyer, if he goes beyond a certain limit.
Right.
But so all these costs added up, can be conservatively, I would put them at, easily at 1% of the selling price of the project per month.
Okay.
So that means if you take an example of a project which is 1 lakh square feet,
Right.
and let us say the selling price is 8,000 rupees a square foot.
Okay.
So that means the project cost is 80 crores.
Right. Yes.
So, 1 month of delay can be as much as 80 lakhs.
Yes.
So actually, when we talk about cost control, we should really focus on, crashing the project durations and bringing predictability in construction, and ensuring that, all the processes are streamlined to, end on the designated date.
Okay.
So that will save them cost, definitely.
We spoke about cost implications, so that was really covered in detail. Next, I want to come to project management consultants who are, working on every large project. So, first of all, how do they help in, actually evaluating the risks or taking the project, through the entire cycle and kind of assessing these delays? And also, how do agencies like CQRA, how can they help in managing the quality and averting delays in construction?
Actually, all these agencies, project management consultants, they play a very important role in, managing the project. They have got a lot of responsibility on their shoulders. Okay, and good agencies can really do wonders for the job.
Okay.
but they are the agencies who are actually responsible for it. Okay, they are supposed to get the work done. So they cannot have a independent feedback mechanism to the client, to tell the client what is going wrong.
Right.
So that is where a third, completely independent third party agency like CQRA comes into picture.
Okay.
Whether it is quality, whether it is safety or time management, where things are going wrong, that only a independent agency that has got no conflict of interest will be able to give a eye opener to the client.
Okay.
So both have a role to play. While the agencies are responsible for it, there has to be a third party to review it.
Okay, right. So that, makes complete sense that, what are the various strategies to mitigate the risks that come with delay in projects. And we looked at a whole host of them. I hope our viewers had a very good and informative session, because I definitely, learned a lot on this. And especially, the last point, we'll stress it that, PMCs are important, but there is always a need for a third party, unbiased, body which can actually, tell you what is going wrong in the project. So thank you, Mr. Kunte, for this wonderful session. Thank you.